Hi, it's Penny here, and today I wanted to talk to you about some morally grey characters in some of my favourite books. I always really love it when books really get into the complexity of being a morally good person. I think it's something in real life that we all struggle with, and we all want to believe that we are a good person, but are we? Maybe not all the time. And so it seems accurate that the same would be true for characters in books. But in books, we have a lot more scope for characters to be much more morally grey, to do really bad things, but still also maybe be good sometimes. So, I've got 10 characters to talk about. Honestly, it was hard to cut this list down to 10. There's heaps of others that maybe I would have included on a different day. And I tried to order these from least favourite to most favourite, but again, that would definitely change on a different day. So firstly, we're going to talk about 2 where I don't own the books, and then we'll get into the rest where I do own the books. So firstly, I wanted to talk about The Magicians series by Lev Grossman. This is a series I haven't actually read in a while, but Murphy Napier's been reading it lately and reminded me about it and has made me want to reread it. This is about these students that discover there is a magic school, but it's at university level, and when they get into this magic school, maybe magic isn't everything that they believed it was going to be. The most obviously morally grey character in this is the main character, Quentin, who's really just a little shit. He's so selfish and self-absorbed, but he's never intentionally bad. Maybe he's never intentionally good either. He's just trying to work out how to be happy. I will say, for this book series, I didn't really like the first book. It's terribly written, but I do think the series gets better and better as you go along. So by the third book, I really loved it, and I think the character that shines the most in the third book is Janet. Now again, Janet is often a really awful person and does some really shitty things, but in the third book, she's almost just well, I took over and saved the day because you bitches weren't doing anything. And I admit it's been a long time since I read this, but I think she's kind of just well, I was bored, so I did the heroic thing. But she's never really worried about, is it the right thing? Anyway, by the end of the series, Janet was my favourite. Then I also wanted to talk about Rin from the Poppy War trilogy. So this, I only read the first book and kind of the second book I skimmed through the audiobook because I didn't really like this series. But I do think Rin is an amazing example of a morally grey character. And even though I didn't like the series, I did really like the first book. So in this one, we have Rin, who is this orphan, and she works really hard to get into this military academy. And I would say for the first book, you kind of think of her as the hero of the story, and you're expecting her to do some really amazing things when her country ends up at war, and she has these amazing magical abilities that are linked to the gods, and there's so many cool ideas in there. But then Rin starts making some very questionable decisions, and maybe they're justified, maybe, but are they good decisions? Definitely not. There's a lot of times where she kills people just because she's angry, not for any good reason. And I think even people who love the series would say it's debatable whether Rin is a good person or not. Okay, then into books where I do own at least some of the books. I want to talk about The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever. I have a bind-up of the first 3 books and then also the second Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever. So this is a really strange book. We have Thomas Covenant, who is this crotchety old man with leprosy, and he's very bitter about how his life has turned out. Not a nice guy at all. And then he ends up falling through this portal into this other world where they're like, hey, you're the chosen one, you're here to save us all. He doesn't really believe it. He's pretty convinced in the beginning that it's all a dream. In fact, even I think in the second trilogy, he's still I think this might just be a dream. And I think the worst thing that he does is something that does put some people off about this series, and I think that is justified. So right at the beginning, he's convinced it's a dream. Is that a good excuse for when he rapes this young woman? Probably not. It does lead him through the rest of the books to be trying to redeem himself, and I don't think the book ever paints it as he does redeem himself. Even when he does a lot of great things to try and save this magical world, for him, it's always clouded by the fact that he started out by thinking it was a dream and raping this young girl. And just through the whole book, he's I'm not the chosen one. This is just a dream. This isn't even real. And as a result, he often does things that are not the right thing. So this is another one where I haven't read it in a while, but I would love to go back to it because it was such an amazingly complex world. And Thomas Covenant was a really interesting character. Then next I want to talk about a bunch of characters from the realm of the Elderlings. I'm sure you knew this was going to be on the list somewhere, so let's just get it done. There's definitely an argument that Fitz himself in the Farseer trilogy and all the rest of them is morally grey. Like, he's training to be an assassin. Yes, he's taught that this is just what he has to do from when he's a young child, but a lot of his problems come from him always putting the crown and the royal line above everything else. And he does do a lot of questionable things as a result. However, I don't think Fitz is the most interesting morally grey character in this series. More interesting is Night Eyes. So Night Eyes is this wolf that somewhere along the way Fitz saves, and Fitz also has this magical ability called the Skill, where he can speak to and bond with animals, and he ends up bonding with Night Eyes. And they have an amazing relationship, but Night Eyes is a wolf, and Night Eyes thinks like a wolf. Quite often Night Eyes is saying, well, why don't you just kill everyone though? Like, if they're annoying you, you could just kill them. And because Night Eyes is a wolf and his perspective is that of a wolf, he doesn't see anything wrong with that. And there is nothing wrong with it from his perspective. But at the same time, Night Eyes has a very pack-like perspective. So he sees certain people as part of his pack, and he has a lot of loyalty towards the members of his pack. So it's not just like he's a savage wolf and he's going kill everyone, who cares? Well, maybe in the beginning when he's first caged up. But as he builds relationships with people, you see a more caring side of Night Eyes. And I just love throughout the story, he's always coming with a different perspective, with a wolf perspective on things. Another character that you could argue is morally grey would be Malta from the Lifeship Traders series. So Malta is a teenage girl, and having been a teenage girl, I have to say, when you're a teenage girl, I think you're pretty morally grey, because you're starting to realise what it is you want, and you're going to get it. And maybe you haven't really thought about whether what you want is right. Anyway, Malta just wants the life that she is dreaming about having, and she doesn't really care about what she might have to do or what she might do to others in order to get it. And of course, the whole point of the story is Malta has like an amazing amount of character development and becomes a very different person, but in the beginning she's very morally grey, and I love it. As well, one last one from the realm of the Elderlings. In the Rainwell Chronicles, we have the dragons, and again, I think very similar to how I love Night Eye's wolf perspective, I love the dragon's perspective. They, again, have a very different perspective of what's good and what's not. In general, they have a very low regard of humans, and so for them, the death of a human, especially if it's in service of a dragon, who cares, right? It's not like humans are as important as dragons. So I love that perspective of the world as well. Then next we have Locke Lamora and his band of con artists and thieves from the Lies of Locke Lamora, the Gentleman Bastards series. So I think with this one, you're introduced right up to this friend group, and it makes you really like them as people and like their group, but you can never forget that they are constantly trying to con people out of their money. And maybe the people that they're trying to con are corrupted themselves. But they definitely don't hold back from hurting innocent people along the way, if it's really necessary for their con. But at the same time, like, there are some good intentions there. Maybe. I'm kind of remembering that one of my criticisms of the first book when I read it is that, like, they just seem to be wanting to do this con and not having any reason for why they would want all that money. But also, in the third book, we get Locke's love interest come along. They've broken up previously and she had disappeared. And when you find out how he acted towards her, like, her dislike of him is fairly justified. Like, I was pretty mad at him. So I think a lot of people who love this series end up loving the friend group, and they really care for each other and they do a lot for each other. And some of their cons do have eventual good outcomes for certain groups of people, but they still cause a lot of harm along the way, and they don't really care about that. Then we have the Black Prism from the Black Prism series by Brent Weeks. So in this world we have color-based magic where people can turn colored light into different kinds of materials. The color of the light determines the material, and we also have this religious figure called the Black Prism who's able to split light and use all the colors of the light. And the Black Prism is a very interesting character. It's sometimes hard to talk about this because he's not everything that you think from the beginning of the series. But as I said, he's got this very important religious position of power in the world. He's got a lot of political power. And when you first meet him, it seems like he has good intentions. But then you discover that he has someone trapped in his basement. And he has had them trapped in the basement for years, and he's not planning to ever let them out. He's also not great in the way that he treats women in the series. And just like, in many ways, he comes across as very shallow and, again, self-absorbed. But at the same time, he does a lot of heroic things. So I really loved this story and just the way that he is often an awful person. He's so arrogant, kind of a jerk, but also a hero. And throughout the series, we also get other characters that are fairly morally grey. So his father is one, which for the most part, I would say is a villain. But does he also do some good things? Yes. There's also secrets in this world that sometimes make people think that they're doing the right thing until they discover what's really going on. And then you have the question like, now that you know the secret, do you continue doing what you always did, which people believe to be good? Or do you do something that would seem bad but actually is good? I can't talk about this series without spoilers. There is also a part in here, but the way that it investigates this morally grey character and like slowly reveals his intentions, I really enjoyed it. Then we have Nemesis from The Diabolic by S.J. Kincaid. So The Diabolic is set in this world where they have a lot of technology, but it's now illegal to read or learn anything about that technology. So things have started breaking down, but they don't have the knowledge to fix any of it. At the same time, we have the Diabolics, who are these like genetically created humans, or genetically enhanced humans. Are they really humans? That's the central question of this. But the Diabolics are basically bonded to someone as their bodyguard. So we're following Nemesis, who is a Diabolic, and she's just trying to protect this girl that she's the bodyguard of. But they've been friends since they were very young children. It's so hard. So throughout this book, Nemesis is really struggling with, like, is she really a human? Or are the differences in her enough to make her not human? And she's been created as someone who's capable of killing people. And she forms this relationship with the Emperor's son, who's been raised in this very backstabby, corrupt royal line. And so his morals are not simple to understand either. And there's just a lot of complexity in the world, so it's never really clear what the right thing to do is anyway, as well as her struggling with, is she a human? Can she even be a good person when it's not even clear, is she a person? I really love this series. I will say, I think a lot of people wanted this to be like a sci-fi romance, and they were very disappointed with the twist at the end of this and the direction that the second book went in, but I loved it for that. So if you're going into this thinking that it's going to be like a lovely romance where she discovers that she is a human and she can be a good person, that is not what this is. But I really love this exploration of like what it is to be human. Also a little bit of time travel in there. Sort of. Then we have Light Yagami from the Death Note series. So in this one, we have this Shinigami death god, and he has this notebook where if you write someone's name in it, then they will die. And there's a bunch of rules around how that notebook works, but the Shinigami, he's kind of bored, so he just drops it on the street, and Light Yagami ends up picking it up. And Light decides to use it to kill off all the criminals. So from his perspective, this is a good thing that will lead to good outcomes for the world. Which in some cases might be true, but not always true. And definitely the way that he goes about it is not great. And then he does a lot trying to cover his tracks and stop people from discovering that it's him. Another character who is quite morally grey from the series that I enjoyed is his girlfriend. I think her name is Misa. So she just wants to be famous and have people love her, and she really likes Light, so she wants to support him, and she does a lot of things that are maybe not great as a result. But is she a good girlfriend? I think she's a good girlfriend. Very supportive, very supportive. But is she a good person? It's not really clear. Okay, then we have Glokta from the First Law trilogy. Actually, I think you could argue that every character in this series is morally grey. And I haven't actually read this particular book yet, but it's the only one in the trilogy that I own. But in this series, we basically have a bunch of morally grey characters stuck in the middle of this magical conflict as well as a military conflict between empires. Glokta, my favourite of these. Glokta, I think, is the most clearly morally grey, even though you can also see how he ended up being the person that he is. So initially, Glokta was a very successful soldier, but then he ended up being captured and tortured in this war. And though you might not expect it, after that he has become a torturer himself. It's kind of set up as he has really no other choice because there are no other opportunities for him in this society. He has a lot of physical disabilities and difficulties as a result of the torture that he underwent. But also, throughout this book, he does not shy away from doing really awful things to people, even people that he knows are innocent. But he's also not a completely awful person. There are times when he takes risks in order to save people, but it's very inconsistent because there's other times where there is a good person, and does he attempt to save them? No. And he has his own very personal reasons for why he does the things he does. But throughout the series, or at least in the first 2 books, I think even though you know he's doing terrible things, for the most part you want him to succeed, regardless of what side of the moral compass he's currently working on. I really hope I'm going to like this last book when I get to it. Then lastly, we have Nyx from the Beldame Apocrypha series. This is a series that I pretty much never see anyone talking about, and even though it's been a while since I read it, I would really like more people to read it. I want to reread it, and I think everyone else should read it. So I'm going to try and squish it into as many videos as possible. But anyway, we're following this woman named Nyx, and she is a bounty hunter. She goes and finds wanted criminals, cuts off their heads, and brings them back for the reward. She doesn't really care about whether they're actually guilty or not. She just cares about getting the money so she can survive. And she has this crew, and at least in the beginning, she doesn't really care that much about them either. That does change throughout the series. But honestly, through most of the book, she's just a badass bitch, just trying to get through the day, figure out what's going on with this corruption. She definitely does some really awful things. I guess the summary for this and all of the books is these are characters who do really shitty things and then often not really worried about the fact that they've done shitty things. They're just doing what they have to do, or what they think they have to do, or what they want to do for their own selfish needs. Anyway, you should read this book. I think this is the most kind of science fiction-y of all the books I've talked about. Most of the others are more fantasy. This is kind of sci-fi fantasy with like bug-based magic, science. I don't know. I thought it was cool. And Nyx is definitely my favourite bad bitch. So, let me know down in the comments what morally grey characters you really love, especially ones you think that I will also love. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.